Is this really fair? I was just taking a look around the dungeon, and you tie me to this chair. Huh, okay. Let's talk about villains. Hey Dungeoneers, welcome back to another episode of D&D with me. I'm your friendly Dungeon Master Peter, and today we're talking about villains. Villains, or antagonists, that's something that every story needs. Without that, the protagonist just walks through the story. And we never want to make it easy for them, right? I want you to think back on the villains that you've seen throughout all types of media, and which ones really stick out. When done correctly, villains are something that we love to hate. And we try to bring that to D&D. When we make a good thought out character, or a good thought out villain, we want our players to love to interact with them. In this video, we're going to go over a few different types of villains, and with some examples to help better influence your villain for your perfect campaign. But before we start, I want to know, what is the most memorable villain that you have created or encountered in a TTRPG or D&D campaign? Let me know in the comments below. All right, I'll be reading them. So I kind of wanted to add this in, a little insight on what I do in my games. I like to start a game off with no real BBEG or villain created. I like to give the players a small nuisance to deal with within the first few sessions and see how they interact with them. From there, I start to lay the framework on what type of villain I want to put in my game. Without further ado, let's dive in, shall we? Now, this isn't the end-all be-all in regards to types of villains, but this is just a taste of a few villain archetypes that you can use in your games. Now, first off, the anti-villain. This is a villain that has sympathetic motivation or appealing characteristics. You know, this is in the same way an anti-hero is a hero with villainous or immoral tendencies. And an anti-villain might have justifiable or moral goals, or even a good side. We also like to think of these anti-villains as someone maybe who is put into a position of power that has to uphold this power even though they might be a little reluctant of it. Some examples are Javert from Les Mis. Yep, and there's the meme right there where he's looking in the window. He's clearly the villain, and he's getting in the way of the happiness of Jean Valjean, but he's driven by the law and the rules set out before him. Another example, Draco Malfoy. And I know what you're going to say, isn't he more of a bully? We're going to mention that later. But we're talking a little bit more later in the series. We see a shift from him becoming the bully to the anti-villain. Throughout the later half of the series, we see him struggling with his task to, and I know it's going to be a spoiler, folks, but it's been a couple years and it's time to move on. To murder Dumbledore. We see him at a point of having a nervous breakdown. And then when the time comes for him to finish his task, he hesitates and there's an intervention to kind of save him from that. That's a great example of an anti-villain. He had these goals. He needed to complete this, for his family and for that guy. But he knew what he was doing was wrong. So when would I use the anti-villain? Well, I would use him in a campaign where someone is duty-bound and chasing down the party. This could be a guard, an aristocrat, a noble, a knight. Or the anti-villain can be someone the party once looked up to. That favorite NPC that they find out has been doing anything just to have them triumph. That's something to think about. And now, the next one. We'll be going to forgotten reaches of the world. Hearing voices in our heads, dissonant whispers. Someone calling from the void. The ancient evil. The ancient evil doesn't just show up at the beginning of a campaign. Usually they're brought forth by someone doing something a little shady. Maybe a cult member. Maybe they open an ancient crypt. Maybe they read it aloud from a wrong book. Or summoned something they shouldn't have. Whatever the cause, something evil that once lay dormant is now awoken, and a great power will be needed to save the world from it. This is something evil for evil's sake. Something beyond reasoning. This is evil incarnate. This is a classic villain of epic fantasy that we don't really see anymore, but an oldie is still a goodie. So what are some examples of an ancient evil? Well, first of all, Sauron. He's a timeless evil that has taken many forms documented in the Silmarillion. And every time he's faced, he can't be defeated by conventional means. And he is tied to one sacred object that is awakened once found. And that's how the Lord of the Rings kicks off. And next, we have Cthulhu. Sorry about that. There's a little bit of an instability here in this little pocket dimension. We have Cthulhu. One that is imprisoned and destined to return, as his worshippers say. Even though this ancient evil is imprisoned, he still affects people around him. Cthulhu doesn't even need to be around because the followers of Cthulhu and the many creatures of Cthulhu drive the main story. When would I use the ancient evil in a campaign? Well, we have to address the elephant in the room. When the warlock does something shady, let's be honest. Maybe when a player reads too deep into a tome they shouldn't have. Or maybe the players have already been beset into a campaign where an ancient evil has been awoken, and they're the only answer to stop it. Okay, time for something a little tamer. The bully. I like to introduce the bully early on, and have them show up a little bit later down the road, to add that extra tension into a random situation that the players have run into. And bullies serve as a straightforward opposition to the protagonist early on in the story. That's why I like to use them within the first few sessions. A bully is easily to be dealt with, but if they aren't outright dealt with, they might come back stronger and angrier. The bully is sometimes marked with a backstory that they had something done to them and now they're doing it onto others. You know, such as a troubled past, humiliation, the list goes on. But they are always insecure. And you know, it's rare for them to be a dick just for dick's sake, you know? Now, let's go into an example of bullies. You have Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest. You know, she is described as a cold, heartless tyrant, and she exercises her total power over the hospital. And she controls and seemingly takes joy out of revoking privileges from a patient that stands up to her. Now, you wonder what brought her to this point. Well, we learned that her past as a World War II nurse affected how she treats her patients. And one a little bit more recent is, I can't believe I'm using this person, Gary Oak from Pokemon. The longtime friend of Ash turned rival. I can't tell you how many times I hated dealing with him. And you all know that when you played the game, you added in a different nickname, and ones we can't really put on YouTube right now. You know, he believes he has an advantage over the rest of the trainers because his grandpa is Professor Oak, and he shows off multiple times to mask his worries that Ash is a better trainer than him. So when would I use the bully? I think the bully is a great starting off point for the first few levels of a campaign. They can either be taken care of, or grow into something bigger down the road. Next up, the Mastermind. The Mastermind opposes the protagonist by overseeing a massive, intellectual, diabolical master plan. They're often a gifted schemer and masters of manipulation. And this is a little different. This is a villain that seeks to best the protagonist mentally, not physically. Examples of the Mastermind would be Hans Gruber from Die Hard. He rarely shows his hand and reveals his master plan until he deems it necessary. He even goes as far as deceiving John McClane into making him believe he is one of the kidnapped partygoers. And he doesn't resort to getting blood on his hands until it's the final straw. He was someone who really just relished having one up over John McClane. And this one's a little bit more classic, but Professor Moriarty, the intellectual adversary of Sherlock Holmes. He was ruthless, but he never participated in any of his plans. He orchestrated it in the shadows. He was always easily enraged whenever his plans were thwarted by Sherlock Holmes. And somewhat like the Joker in The Dark Knight, he relished having Sherlock Holmes as an adversary. He would love to go head-to-head with him, just to have someone on his level. I would use the Mastermind in a campaign that is beset in political intrigue. You know, someone that is really behind the scenes pulling the strings. You know, you can learn this in your session 0. If your players like solving puzzles and riddles, I think a Mastermind is a great point for that. Next up, the Dark Lord. Unlike the Ancient Evil, the Dark Lord is a contemporary of the protagonist, or someone a generation older. What sets them apart from other villains is their official status of an organization or a group. And Lord is a loose term here. It could be a king, queen, warlord, someone that is in a higher standing and running a group. A Dark Lord will always have henchmen, minions, underlings to carry out their plans. And those minions are often used to be thrown at the protagonist just before the final battle to soften them up, so they can deal the final blow. Now, the portrayal of a Dark Lord is pretty simple, but you want to bring out the person behind the Dark Lord. You need to have more personality than just a title. Examples of the Dark Lord. And no, we're not using Voldemort, he's too easy. We have Jadis, the White Witch from the Chronicles of Narnia, a tremendously powerful sorceress that placed herself in the place of power in Narnia. I mean, she's so powerful that she casts a spell to make it winter all the time. I want to see you do that, Elsa. Alright? She could transform anyone that opposed her into ice and stone. This, in itself, just breeds fear for anyone that tries to stand up against her. She had scores of minions, henchmen, and underlings of varying species. The next up is the Horn King from the Black Cauldron. Yeah, much like Jadis, but also one of my all-time favorite villains, just from the look of them. I mean, how could you not be terrified of that? And I'll also be talking about the Disney movie, which apparently differs from the books, because I just learned today that this is a book as well. The Horned King wants to unleash an undead army from the Black Cauldron and will stop at nothing to get that to happen. And once again, he has many servants at his disposal. Goblins, huntsmen, and whatever that is. So when would I use the Dark Lord? Maybe someone that affected the player's life beforehand. This could be a ruling lord that burned down the village, or actually an uncle or a noble that was a part of power. I don't know why I just went to uncle. You could also use it as a once peaceful political power that has turned to war through mysterious means. This is a great villain to combine with an ancient evil as almost a mid-level stepping stone to finally get to that ancient evil power. And a big thing to remember here is intention. You know, a villain isn't just evil for evil's sake, unless it is a ancient evil. A big thing to remember is what drives the villain's actions. Ask yourself, why is the villain doing what they're doing? Do they think what they're doing is right? Are they aware that it's going against the greater good, but have a means to an end? And this begs the question, is your villain really a villain in their eyes? Think about that. Alright, time for a recap. We have the anti-villain. This is a villain that has sympathetic motivation or appealing characteristics. We have the ancient evil, something beyond reasoning. Evil for evil's sake. The bully. Something simple that is a straightforward opposition to the players. The mastermind, an evil genius who attempts to defeat the protagonist mentally as opposed to physically. And lastly, we have the Dark Lord, a villain that has official status or is a leader of an organized group. Always remember the intention of your villains. 9 times out of 10, villains don't think what they're doing is wrong. Look at your campaign story as a whole and think which villain would be the best fit. And a fun exercise for you is to look at it from all angles, see which villains you can mix and match and add into your campaigns. But that's it for me, Dungeoneers. Don't forget to like, favorite, comment, subscribe. And you can always find me on twitch.tv/DND with me doing some world building if you're interested in that. Until then, I have to go defeat this evil villain. 1 second. I just want to talk.